Welcome to video number 1 in the Wild Soul series, where we talk about how to hear and follow the call of your wild soul. My name is Patty Bear, and I have followed the call since I was a young child and have navigated this way ever since. I grew up I was a little girl in an insular, old order Mennonite upbringing among the plain people of Pennsylvania, and it took me from there to flying big airplanes around the world. So literally from plane to plane. But this experience is how I know that this path is possible for anyone, including a child. So today, I'm going to talk about 3 main questions. 1, what is the call of the wild soul? What does that really mean? We're going to flesh that out a little bit. We're going to talk about some other people who've written about similar concepts. And then just as importantly, what is it not? 2, how is this relevant for you in your life? 3, do you have to believe in it for it to work? Is this a religious practice or something like that? And then at the end of each of these videos in the series, what I'm going to do is I'm going to offer you a place to play, a place to practice some new skills, a place to raise awareness, just something to do to increase your abilities between each of these videos. But first, I want to start with that 3rd question and the part of it about, is this religious or not? And the answer to that is unequivocally no. Some people may think about this in a spiritual sense. You don't have to. You can think about this as your intuition, your higher self, your inner self. Some people call it the universe. You can think about it however you want. You can be a churchgoer, you can be agnostic, you can be an atheist. It doesn't matter. You can still access this principle and think about it in a way that's comfortable for you. So with that said, I want to talk about someone else who wrote about this concept in a little different way. And this person, James Hillman, he's a famous Jungian psychologist, and he wrote the book, The Soul's Code, In Search of Character and Calling. Sorry, trying to read it here upside down and backwards. But this was the first time I'd ever heard anyone talk about the experiences that I had, that I recognized it. And he called the concept of what lies within us and the calling, he called it the Acorn theory. So let me get my show and tell prop here. I have here a branch from an oak tree, and you can see the acorns on it. So he cut out the acorn theory, and he said that what lies beneath the cap of the acorn, everything for what this acorn will eventually become, which is an oak tree, lies within this little container. All the instructions are there. And what he said further was that the same is true for human beings. He said each person bears a uniqueness that asks to be lived and that is already present at birth. Each person enters the world called. And he gives a number of examples in his book of how these early callings showed up. Sometimes different for, very different for different people. So if you're a parent, if you have a number of siblings, you'll recognize that each one of your children is quite different from the other. They come into the world with different personalities, different drives, different interests, and that's already present at birth. So he gives some examples of how this showed up for some famous people. He talks about Barbara McClintock, who was a pioneering geneticist and a Nobel Prize winner. And at the age of 5, she asked for some tools from her father, and what she received were tools that fit her hands. But she didn't want those. She wanted adult-sized tools. Another example of this was the renowned violinist Yehudi Menuhin. And Hillman talks about, he tells the story of how a young Yehudi would go to concerts with his parents. And one time after a number of these concerts, he asked for his 4th birthday. He wanted a violin, and he wanted the concertmaster that he admired, Louis Pershing, to give him lessons. And he did get his wish, sort of. A family friend gave the young Yehudi Menuhin a violin. It was a metal violin with metal strings, and when he got it, the young Yehudi threw it to the ground and started sobbing because he wanted a real violin. And what Hillman says is that something in each of these people, something larger than themselves, knows what their destiny, what lies within them, and knows that and recognizes that, and it won't be satisfied with anything less. Hillman describes how the genius within is not bound by age or by size or by education or training, that it carries a grandeur of vision that knows what is asking to be realized. It comes into this world trailing clouds of glory as we come. So I just want to emphasize here that we're not all called to be famous. That's not in service of all of our paths. Some people are, some people aren't. It doesn't really have anything to do with worth. It has to do with something on their path. So I just want to point that out. But the examples of famous people allow us to go back, because they've been documented, allow us to go back and serve as examples of this calling coming through them. We can study them. But we are all called. We may not all be called to be famous, but we are all called to realize. And separate that word out, realize, to make real something within us, something unique only to us. And that this is an adventurous path of unfolding for us, just as the acorn that unfolds eventually into an oak tree is a process. And this journey ultimately produces a gift. So if we come back to the example here of the acorn and the oak tree, as the oak tree matures into what it is to become the, did I say that wrong? The acorn, as the acorn matures into the oak tree that it is to become, there is a gift that is realized as well. So the oak tree provides lumber, it provides shelter to animals, it provides food. Some people eat the acorn, or some animals eat the acorns, provides shade, it purifies our air. So in the process of becoming, we also offer gifts as a result of that journey. Our life purpose and our bliss unfold in companionship with each other. I want to emphasize that once again. There's a lot of attention paid and a lot of emphasis on finding your life purpose. And if you're someone who has gone down that path, you know it can be quite frustrating unless it's very clear from a young age. It's a constant wondering. But what I would say is that if you follow the call of your wild soul, it is leading you to your destiny. And what the ultimate form of your purpose takes will be realized, will be revealed. And so we don't need to stress or spend a lot of effort trying to figure out what that thing is, because the odds are it will probably take a different shape than you originally assumed it should. So I'll say that once again, our life purpose and our bliss unfold in companionship with each other. So Hillman talks about how sometimes a genius shows up initially, not as a strong interest like it did for Barbara McClintock or for Yehudi Menuhin, but it shows up as a strong resistance. So if any of you out there have experienced strong resistance in the form of continuing procrastination, you might find this interesting as an explanation for that. He gives the example of Manolete, the legendary Spanish bullfighter, who at 30 years old would, Spain would see the largest funeral ever in its history. He was a renowned bullfighter, but he wasn't You wouldn't have guessed that before the age of 11, because as a young boy, he was timid, he was sickly, he hid behind his mother's apron strings. And Hillman suggests two things. One, that he was daunted by this destiny that lay within him of facing 1,000-pound bulls with razor-sharp horns. And two, that he may also have been the hiding behind his mother's skirt may also have been an early manifestation of the cape, the use of the cape that bullfighters use. But he suggests, and I think convincingly so, that this deity within him may have been daunted by the prospect of his future. He gives an example also of Colette, the French writer, who as a young child was just a voracious writer. I'm sorry, a voracious reader, but who refused to learn to write. And even she would say later on that she was prevented from writing before she was ready, that she was sort of guarded from the beginning. Either because she may have gotten burned out too early, or because she was not ready to receive the gift, not ready to carry the gift that she carried yet. And then there's another important aspect to the Acorn theory, and it says that each one of us carries the seed of something within us that asks to be lived, and that we each come with an invisible guidance specific to this destiny, an inner tutor, a companion that walks with us on this path. So this idea of an inner tutor is not something that's unique to Hillman. Many other cultures have this philosophy. Many other people have written about it. It's not unique to him. There's a long lineage of this. So the Christians, for example, call this a guardian angel. Rumi, as we talked about in the first video, called it the strange pull of what you really love, this idea of being led by something within you, something that pulls you. Joseph Campbell called it following your bliss. The Greeks called it a daimon. The Romans called it your genius. And they had a different concept of what your genius meant than we do today. So today we think of genius as somebody who's exceptionally talented, somebody who's exceptionally bright. But the Romans, that wasn't the way they originally conceived of genius. Genius was this thing within you that that guided you. It was a genie, it was an inner tutor. And so when James Hillman talks about this, this is how he uses that concept of genius. And I think it's a wonderful way of thinking about it because it's within all of us. But consistent with all of these different manifestations of the way it was written about is this sense of being guided on a specific path that is unique to you. So we come back to the first question: what is the call of the wild soul? And it is this combination of this inner calling, this being pulled towards something on your unique path, and then the companionship, the inner tutor that walks with you on this path. Why does it matter? Our second question. It matters because when we're aligned with what we carry within us, we experience bliss and we naturally live out our purpose in the world. We share the gift we brought with us. I want to say also, I talk about how it's just as important to understand what the call of the wild soul is not. And we talked about how it's not a religious concept. So it's not another, it's not a version, it's not another version of the religious concept of what is God's will for you. That voice is something different. It's an external voice. It's often society's voice of what, who you should be, how you should behave. It's oftentimes a voice of morality. And I'm not saying that we don't need to have ethical guidance, but that's not what the call of the wild soul is typically. That's not what it's there for. It's there for the unfolding of what lies within your acorn. This external voice, that external voice we're talking about is most often insistent that you conform your behavior or your group to a particular group. So maybe your religion, maybe your gender, your class. It's about conforming. It's about the voice of the authorities in your life, parents, clergy, bosses, culture. everything you have been conditioned to believe. And by contrast, then, the call of your wild soul is your unconditioned self. It's the very essence of you. It's what was there before you get conditioned about your duties, about all the shoulds of life, about your limitations, about what you can and can't be, about what you should and shouldn't be. So, and it's the wild soul and the inner tutor that brings you guidance around what you were seated with and what you bring to be realized. So I want to share with you my experience of my first experience with this inner voice, and maybe give you a sense of what this looks like in real life. My first encounter with my inner tutor. So I was maybe age 5 or 7. I don't remember the exact year. I don't remember the exact age, but I can pinpoint it to before the age of 8. So I grew up on a farm, and when we weren't working, my 5 siblings and I, we liked to play in the woods, we liked to play in the creek. I liked to play in the meadows and see the flowers and listen to the birds and things like that. And so one day I snuck away from the house, and what I was really sneaking away from was my mother had this long list of chores. She had 6 children, so she was always trying to keep us busy, keep us out of trouble. So she would always have something for us to do. And I figured that if I could get out of the house and I could sneak down to the meadow, I could go into the woods without being seen. If I could get far enough away where I couldn't hear her calling, then I could honestly say I hadn't heard her calling. So I did this. I packed myself a little brown bag lunch because I was going to be gone for a little bit. And I went down the meadow, and then I followed this path that the animals take that was on this little ridge above the mill race. And a mill race, if you don't know what that is, was water diverted from a creek, and it could go to a mill. But the water in our mill race ran kind of slowly. It ran so slowly that the top of the mill race was just covered with iridescent green algae. It covered everything. And so when I got down to my favorite spot where I'd sit on the bank, what I faced was this stream just covered in this sort of magical bright green. And on top of that were these lily pads with frogs sitting on them and the lily flowers. And then up the bank, right beside me, was this whole grouping of yellow buttercups, and it was just magical. So I sat down there, sat in my spot, and from there I could look out over the fence on the other side of the mill race, and I looked up, up, up. It was a summer day, and it was a beautiful, beautiful, bright blue sky. And I looked up, and there were these clouds up there, and they were just crisp, perfect clouds. They were big, puffy, crisp clouds, not a hint of rain in them yet, but they were crisp enough that I, in my imagination, thought you might be able to walk on them. They might be firm enough to walk on them and you wouldn't fall through. So my imagination, I went across and went up into the clouds, and I was playing in the clouds and walking past the angels that I assumed lived up there. And unbeknownst to me, I sort of fell into a trance, as we do when we're kids and we're lost in our imagination, lost in daydreaming. And then I was suddenly jerked out of this trance by a voice. And it was kind of this stern voice. And it said, "You will have a bigger life." And my first thought was, what was that? Where did it come from? I was kind of scared because I was sitting in this it was like a little woods. There were saplings behind me, and I was far enough away from the house that if I screamed, nobody could hear me. So I literally thought that this was the voice of someone, and I was looking around for who this could be. I'm like left, right, behind me, and I'm kind of scared while I'm looking around doing this. And I don't see anybody. So then I start thinking about the message, "You will have a bigger life." And I was kind of indignant. And I thought, I love this farm. I loved where I lived. It was beautiful. The nature was just enchanting. And I was like, I don't want to live anywhere else. I don't want to go anywhere. This is the only place I ever want to be. And so I was kind of a little annoyed, frankly. And because I didn't see anybody, then I was like, well, what was that? I didn't have any explanation for it. And so I just was like, well, must be my imagination. And I dismissed it. I said to myself, well, my mother did always say I was a dreamer. And that's it. I didn't think anything more about it. But then when I was just after I was about 8 years old, my world started to fall apart. My father got excommunicated and shunned by our community, and this set off a series of quite dramatic events. And it was shocking and upsetting enough that I received crucial guidance at times, and they delivered simple but clear messages. And this time I didn't question them. This time I didn't dismiss them, and I took the guidance and I acted on it, and sort of never looked back. I still didn't know what it was, but I had the sense that there was something about it that was very, very true and very trustworthy. And so when I look back now, I suspect that that first encounter, that what it was doing was raising my awareness and drawing my attention to something, so that when I needed the guidance later, that I paid attention. I didn't dismiss it. So hope that gives you a sense of one of the ways, and we're going to talk about it in the next video, some of the other ways that it shows up, because there are at least I would say 6 or 7 different ways it shows up, if not more. So we come back to the question that I raised about, do you need to believe this for it to work? And I hope that my story shows you that no, you don't need to believe in it. I didn't even know what this was. I grew up in a culture where all of our wisdom came through the bishops and through the ministers, who interpreted the word of God for us, and then we were supposed to not question that. We were supposed to obey that. So I had nothing in my background that suggested that direct guidance was a possibility of any sort. I wasn't trained to believe in my intuition. I wasn't trained to listen to my inner self. So you don't have to believe it. You just have to be open to the concept that it might be available for you. I will say this, that the inner tutor that I experienced was a very, very different experience from what I had been raised to believe in, this concept of, we'll tell you what to believe and don't question it. And it was different qualitatively in that it didn't set itself up as an authority figure, which when I think about it now, I didn't when I was a child, and I didn't for a long time, but when I think about it now, it's a really crucial part of the validation process, I would say. And so this inner mentor, it gave information, it offered advice, it offered insight, and I could take it or leave it. I could doubt it, I could question it, I could take some of it, I could leave the rest of it. It simply gave the information. And I wasn't punished. I wasn't punished for questioning it. I wasn't punished for doubting it. And it didn't ask me to obey it. It really didn't ask for anything. It offered something. It said, here's something to think about. Here's an open door. Here's an opportunity. Here is an understanding. And it simply offered. So I could disregard it if I liked. I was completely at choice. And then the other important thing to understand about this voice is that, unlike some of the external voices that we hear, some of the external voices of authority in the culture, in our personal cultures and in the larger culture, there's an ego aspect to it, where there's a demand to be recognized as an authority. And when I look at my history with this, there was none of that. There there was no, as I said, once again, there was no sense of it needing to be an authority, and that it was bad to question it. None. So it did not seek obedience from me. I want to make that really clear. It was quite the opposite. In fact, it was a steadfast soul companion, and it actually liberated me from some of the more destructive beliefs that I had been taught about myself and about the world. And sometimes it opened my eyes to insights about myself and the world around me. It drew my attention to things that I needed to change about myself. But I was always responsible for the choices, and I was always responsible for what I did with the information that I received. The other thing, and we'll talk about this more in future videos, is that often the guidance that I received was unconventional. It was different than I would have expected, and I needed to make room for that. Sometimes that took a little bit of time to figure out. Sometimes it just took a little bit of like, oh, it was like an aha. So the inner tutor often held much more expansive possibilities than I could have envisioned and sometimes even imagined. As I talked about, sometimes the guidance came with gentle but firm course corrections or character corrections that were holding me back, as opposed to what we talked about before, like a moral voice. It was more about what was holding me back, what needed to be developed. So once again, just to emphasize, no, you don't need to obey the call of your wild soul. And in fact, until you become comfortable with this concept, I would encourage skepticism. I would encourage a logical analysis. What is actually being communicated here? How does it fit you? Does it fit you? And does it fit you right now? Sometimes you get guidance in advance, and it's there for when you're ready. So it may not be immediately pertinent. And I'll have an example of that on the next video. But until you become attuned to your inner tutor, and you learn to recognize the vibration of integrity that carries, discernment. You can't go wrong with that. You want to be able to discern between this voice of your inner tutor and what we sometimes hear, anxiety or fear, what some people call the monkey mind. Distinguish between this and the group mind. And that takes a little bit of practice. But the calling your wild soul is like having a personal mentor. And as with any mentor, you're free to take the advice given, you're free to ignore it, free to take the best and leave the rest. It's entirely your call. But the thing about having a mentor, and if you relate this to a mentor, a visible mentor in your life, say a work mentor, say a parent, say anybody who would act as a mentor in your life, some kind of advisor, is that if you are not attuned to it, or if you tune it out, eventually you don't hear it anymore. And so it's the same way with the call of your wild soul. You want to tune into it, and then you want to sort of keep those muscles in shape, and to learn not to tune out of it, because we can do that. We can get tuned out whenever we're busy in life, or tuned out when maybe the crisis has passed and we think that's all the voice is there for. But that's what we're going to focus on in the next video. We're going to talk about how to tune into the call of your wild soul, and we're going to talk about the specific different ways to recognize this. You'll probably have 2, maybe 3 primary ways that you hear, that you're communicated with, that you're in connection with your inner tutor. You want to be able to hear all of them if possible, but you probably have 2 or 3 that will feel the most natural to you. So we're going to talk about all of them, and then get you to practice with that a little bit if you like, and develop those skills. And that's it for now. As promised, I said I would leave you with an exercise to play with this material before the next video. And so the first, let me leave you with two things. The first one is, if it interests you, read The Soul's Code by James Hillman. He's a wonderful storyteller. It's an easy read, and it's just, I find it fascinating. So I leave that with you. And two, the second part of this is to look back to a time in your life, maybe your childhood, and think about the times, look back and see if you can recognize where you were getting guidance from your inner tutor. How did it show up? Did you have some strong interest as a young child that shows up maybe in a different way now as an adult? Did you hear a voice, either an external voice that sounded like a person, or an internal voice, or an intuition? Did you have a visual message? Did an opportunity open up? Was a way blocked? So those are some places before we begin the next video, just to think about it, just to seed your mind and think about what you're seeded with. So with that, I'm going to sign off. If you're enjoying the series, please like and subscribe below, and I'll see you the next time. Life's an adventure. Live it.